Hello, my name's David Runciman, and this is Past, Present, Future, the History of Ideas podcast. Today, it's the fifth film in our Films of Ideas series. The episode's recorded live in front of an audience at the Regent Street Cinema in London. Today, I'm talking with the film director and campaigner Beeban Kidron about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a much-loved film, also a film that is full of really interesting ideas. It's about memory, it's about identity, it's about loss, it's about technology. And I'm going to be talking to Beeban Kidron about all of that. As with the other episodes in this series, I'm going to say a little bit about the film before we start for people who don't know it. I'm guessing more people know this film than the others we've done so far, but many people will have seen it a long time ago, and as you'll hear in this conversation with Beeban Kidron, it's a very different film seen in 2025 than when it first came out in 2004. It's a film essentially about a couple, played by Jim Carrey. His character is called Joel, and Kate Winslet, her character, is called Clementine. Both of them, in a way, both actors are playing against type. Jim Carrey, a comic actor, plays this one pretty straight. Kate Winslet, who's often pretty serious, plays this one a bit more comedically than Jim Carrey does. The film begins with us meeting the couple, meeting each other, seemingly for the first time. It starts, as they say in romantic comedy circles, with a meet cute. We see them bump into each other first on a beach, then on a train, and we see them in a pretty cute way, getting to know each other, embarking on what looks like it's potentially going to be a real relationship. But we soon discover that these two people already know each other. In fact, we discover they have had a relationship before, and they have forgotten it. They have forgotten each other, and they have forgotten the relationship. They believe they're meeting for the first time. And the reason they have forgotten is that each of them separately has chosen to have that memory erased. A service is available through a technology company run by a character played by the British actor, though with an American accent in this film, Tom Wilkinson. He offers memory erasure for heartbreak, essentially. You can have the person who is causing you the distress simply wiped from your mind. That is the eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. The sequence we discover is that after they broke up first time around, Joel and Clementine, it was Clementine who chose the service first. She wanted Joel out of her head. And then Joel, by a kind of accident, discovers that this is what Clementine has done. And almost on the rebound, as a kind of act of pique, he chooses to do it too. And much of the film takes place simultaneously reconstructing their original relationship, but also showing us the night of Joel's memory erasure. We see him plugged into the machine, and we see the memories being extracted. And during the course of that night, we also see that Joel starts to resist. As he realizes what's happening, he decides he doesn't want to lose the memory of Clementine, and he tries, unsuccessfully it turns out, to cling on, to hold on to those memories. We also see another relationship uncovered in the course of that night. This one between the character played by Tom Wilkinson, the scientist and the boss of the tech company, and the receptionist, his secretary, played by Kirsten Dunst. In the course of the night of Joel's memory erasure, she declares to her boss that she's got a massive crush on him, that she's infatuated with him. And it turns out this has also happened once before. They also have already had a relationship. The difference in this case is that the memory erasure is very unequal. Tom Wilkinson, the character played by Tom Wilkinson, has not had the memory of his affair with his receptionist erased, and he's a married man. She, his underling, is the one who's had the memory erasure. In that case, there is a very, very different kind of power balance, or rather imbalance. And we discuss that too. But as I said, it's also a film about technology, about the power of technology, about the seductive products that may be on offer, including get rid of heartbreak. And I'm talking to Beeban Kidron about that as well. Beeban Kidron was for many years a leading TV and film director. She directed the award-winning BBC adaptation of Jeanette Winterson's Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. She directed, as you'll hear, the second film in the Bridget Jones film series, Bridget Jones, The Edge of Reason. But more recently, she has devoted herself to campaigning. From the House of Lords, she is Baroness Kidron, where she is perhaps Britain's leading campaigner against the power and the abuse of power of the big technology companies. She fights for the rights of people, particularly of children, for protection against what technology is doing to our lives. And as you'll hear, we talk about that as well. Beeban, that film came out in 2004, the same year that your Bridget Jones, The Edge of Reason, came out. We only have the DVD of one of these two films at home, and it's not Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Do you remember it when it came out? Did it make an impact on you in 2004?
I do remember it, and I remember feeling quite frightened of it, because it does the love me just the way you are, but in a very different way. And so it was part of a sort of a new wave of films that were coming out, a sort of, you know, an indie thing that was actually challenging a mainstream, and there I was making the mainstream. So I think, yeah, absolutely, I remember it. I didn't, until I saw it very recently, I don't mean this evening, but, a few weeks ago when I knew this was coming up, I don't think I remembered just how disordered it was. It felt like an impression of something new, something coming. I felt similar when I saw Lost in Translation. It was sort of a dream world. It was a different opportunity. It was saying something in feeling and not simply the words, the scene, the story. And I think that I felt like I'd been thrown back to 70s cinema. So I think I felt quite threatened, is the truth.
So seeing it now and seeing it in the cinema as well, it feels like a throwback to when people made films as films. And yet the thing for me that's so intense about watching this film now is it makes 2004 seem like such a long time ago. So just to sort of put this in context, 2004 was the year that Facebook was created. It was, I think, 6 years after Google. So if you do the history of our time, Google is 1998, 2004, and this film, we should say, is set in 2003, so it's pre even Facebook. 2007 was the invention of the iPhone. 2007 was Twitter, and then we go on from there. In a way, so I remembered it as a film about technology. So my memory of it is it was a film about technology, and it now seems so quaint and analog. And there are so many aspects of this I want to talk to you about, but one of them is this. I found myself thinking as I watched it. So this film suggests that the promise of technology is, blessed are those who can, the Nietzsche quote, I'll get it wrong, but blessed are those who can forget because they can get past even their blunders. That the promise of technology is that it will allow you to get past memory. And that's not, it's a kind of Faustian promise, but still, that's not the world we live in, right? The technology that we have and has created a world in which everything is remembered. And the promise is that you can curate your memories. So that you can maybe pick the memories that you want. Maybe you can imagine a past for yourself out of little bits that you've pulled together. But this, part of why it's so moving, I think, seeing it in 2025, is it's a kind of vision, and it is, it's a poisoned promise, but still of a promise. And that's not our world at all.
No, it's not. It's funny because I see it slightly more complicated than that, in the sense that the memories that we are confronted with are not necessarily of our choosing. The picture that comes up of your past is not the one you necessarily want to see at any particular moment. So the memory is automated. And then there's this other thing, which is the curated self. So the present is also very curated. So you're creating false memories And actually, you know, I do a lot of work with kids, and a lot of what they talk to me about is that their interior self is really private and not shared and not developed because they're so busy being performative. So there's lots of different layers of memory, some of which are automated for commercial reasons. In fact, many of them are. And this question of creating memories between people is more precious still now. So it's a very complicated thing, looking at this film and thinking, you know, those were at least their memories that were being erased and that they felt suddenly were precious and that they were tugging at. Whereas I actually think a lot of the time now, our memories are really messed up by what is imposed on us and what we're performing towards.
The thing that I can't tell with this film is I don't remember enough about the time. It's very analog, and 2004 was a much more analog time than now, but it wasn't a completely analog time. We were already in a digital world. And I'm guessing that this film was deliberately, even in 2004, trying to be more analog than the world that was already coming. Everything is on paper, right? Nothing is computerized. Apart from the brain stuff, nothing is computerized. When they want to communicate with their clients when they want to communicate to the friends of their clients to let them know you mustn't mention Joel, you mustn't mention Clementine, they send them a card through the post. And the way they record the information is on cassette tapes. And my memory of 2004 is we were already beyond cassette tapes. So in a way, it feels to me like this film was a little prophetic in that it was already trying to suggest something about the way in which real human connection and the memory of that thing was already being corrupted by technology. I don't know, because it's really hard to remember what 2004 was like in those terms, but it feels like this was a deliberately human level analog film.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And I mean, I did laugh when I saw the card that tells the other person not to speak to you. And it just sort of speaks to the impossibility of that really happening. So the whole film is really a fable of wanting to forget and the stupidity of wanting to forget, because you can never really forget. And anyway, once you have forgotten, you are not yourself. So this whole sort of complex thing that it's offering. But I think on the tech front, I find it a really anti-technological film. And I do think it was right on that cusp. And I think that a lot of the sort of aesthetic is of its time, the whole slacker thing and, you know, everything from the hair to how the rooms are and, you know, the materiality of space. You know, and that then has another sort of layer that says, hey, we're new French cinema and all of that. So it's looking backwards, but it's also looking over the horizon saying, I don't like this very much. This is not going to be good. And I think it is properly critical. It's not accidentally. It's absolutely saying that the technology that is coming is going to mess with our brains. I think it was very specific.
And is going to mess with our relationships. So it's also, again, quaintly a world in which people get together by kind of meeting each other in what we now, I think, call still real life, but only just.
I think only people our age call it real life. I think young people are really clear about that. There is no difference between one and the other.
But, you know, this is a film about the arc of a relationship through a series of personal encounters beginning, well, there are two versions of the beginning of the story, but both of them happen on the beach. No one meets anyone on the beach anymore.
I don't know why it's come into my head, but a few years ago, one of the big dating apps came to see me, and they'd had a bit of trouble with underage users, and they were coming partly apologetically and partly to tell me how they'd redesigned their service so underage kids wouldn't be on it. And in the course of that discussion, they managed to tell me that they made money from people scrolling and not finding people not from finding people. And I've always had that in the back of my head when I think about how dating through the app is, that the point is not to meet, but to not meet. And that's the commercial imperative. And so it's not just that it's quaint that you meet on the beach, it's that there's something deliberately interrupting that possibility. And I think that's what's sort of cynical and a bit ugly. And that's why actually watching the film, it's romantic. I mean, it's the most romantic, anti-romantic film I've seen for some time. And all that madness, and I don't know about anyone else, but while I was watching it in the middle section, I actually started to have motion sickness as it was moving around. You know, it's not the most comfortable watch, but it so profoundly says, I will take you, even though I know it's going to end up badly, because this moment feels so good to be with you. And that is really properly romantic.
I think I'm right in saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that Michel Gondry, who made this, he came from the world of kind of MTV music videos, which again is another way in which it's so weird thinking about what does and doesn't seem dated. So MTV is a very dated thing, but at the time, this was thought to be the ultimate in the superficiality, the sort of superficializing of human relationships. And here we have an MTV music video director, and you can see it in the style, the way as memories disappear, it gets pulled away and the people disappear. This could be a kind of Van Halen video or something. And yet, seen from now, it's gorgeous. And it's romantic. It's the romance of that way of making film. And at the time, people would have said, you can't, an MTV music video director is not going to be able to do romance.
Well, I think that's interesting. I mean, funnily enough, it was the sound that really got me today, which is the cut, the way it cuts and the way the music goes with the cut is very MTV. But actually, it is really quite compelling in each cut that you feel like you're going through time and space, which actually is part of what they're trying to do. They're stealing your present. They're representing the past. You're not sure all the time whether you're in the present or the past, or whether you've actually seen it again and you're on the round, And all of those things, I think, come from that tradition, but they do also come from this French tradition. It's not just MTV. It's MTV through the gaze of 70s cinema, I think.
And Michel Gondry was recently at the Cannes Festival letting people know that no one will fund his films anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Another way in which it seems quaint, and I'd completely misremembered it, is that I remember this as a film about a sinister technology company. If you'd asked me before I rewatched it, it's a 20-year gap between watching it then and watching it now, I would have said, I remember this film. It's very moving. It's sort of weirdly moving, given in a way how bleak and cynical it is. But really the story is about this corporation, this sort of big tech company that comes in and markets memory erasure in a way that's really prophetic. And it's a sort of glimpse of the world. The big tech company is 3 people or 4 people and a filing cabinet and a telephone and a receptionist. And everything is on a completely human scale. And I'd remembered it as, this is a forerunner of our world. And it seems like it comes from the 19th century in the way it portrays a tech company.
No, I know. It is hilarious. It's not only just 3 people, and a bunch of cards to send out, but it's actually all 3 people are in love with each other. It's like, it's a very complex...
And are using the technology to manage the complexity of these relationships.
Yeah. I actually find that one of the most sort of challenging parts of the film, with the wife coming around and realizing that the stoner couple who you think are just a little bit of colour in the background to make the central relationship interrupted, and then actually they become part of the whole plea, really, for memory at that point in the film. And that's actually where it turns to being quite an emotional film from being more fun. And I did like watching it today in a cinema as it was intended, because people laughed at all the same places as I laughed. And I think it is actually quite funny, but it does turn at that moment into being something, really tragic. And you do wonder whether they are actually going to be able to bring themselves back. But on the tech company, I mean, these guys are nowhere. And the idea that the intrusion requires the drugs, the sleep, the pre-ordered, all of these things. The only thing I thought today that I'd never thought of before was just the data collection. I mean, the amount the companies know about us now, every minute of every day, and one of the things that always shocks people is when I tell them that actually, they do gather the echo from your kitchen to work out what socioeconomic group you're in by how much soft furnishings you have. And if you have enough data, enough people, if you're listening to enough people, you can work out how rich they are from the echo. And also parents are always really concerned when I say, oh, they know how tall your kid is. And they go, wow, well, the gate, the steps. You know how tall someone is from the steps. So, the intimate detail with which we are surveyed now and what it means and what they can do to us and make us think and make us feel and so on. And when they were saying, okay, and they do it about, I think it was 3 times in the film, they say, you start at the beginning, you say, okay, talk about your relationship and bring the photographs and the things and the moments. And I just thought, oh my God, here we go. And that just did seem very prescient to me.
And yet in those cases, the implication is that each of us has something that is distinctive to us. So that knowing about the soft furnishing and the gate and the vast data collection we have now, it's based on the principle that in some ways we are all knowable, because if the data set is big enough, you can do the comparisons between people, which allows you to identify their individuality. But it's not because we are individuals. It's because in a way we all fit the same pattern. And again, there's so many things about this film that feel like they come from another world. And one of which is what the technology company wants you to bring in is the thing that only you can know, that only has meaning for you. And I know the Elijah Wood character, in a way, he's the glimpse of the future, right? Yeah. He's the one who takes the potatoes wearing funny hats and tries to use them to seduce her again. But the implication of their method is that for each of us, there are objects, there are communications, ultimately there are memories, which are not generic. They are specific to us.
Yeah, you're right. Elijah Wood is Mark Zuckerberg. You can see it. You've seen it here tonight. I think it's really interesting because one of the things that the tech companies do, because there are now 3.5 billion of us, is put us into tribes. And so it's the scale. You remembered it as the big tech.
And the scale is just nothing.
And it's just nothing. And so they are bizarrely really individual, but the scale is so huge now that the money is on pushing us into identifying us as tribes so that they can then push certain sorts of behavior. So there is this subtle thing of they were looking for specificity, and the companies now take our specificity to push us into groups. And that's an interesting difference.
You mentioned there's a really, probably the saddest moment in the film is the look on Kirsten Dunst's face when she realizes. And there are many stories going on at the same time, but in a way there are 2 stories in which people have had their memories erased and they return. So Nietzsche is the source of the quote. In this series, people are probably sick of it. We seem to talk about Nietzsche all the time. But I think in this film, there is meant to be some idea of eternal return, in the sense that there's some idea that you erase the memory, but you will live it again. For whatever reason, you will live it again. And we have 2 versions of it in this film. I'm going to ask you in a bit about the main version, because the ending of the film is remarkable. And it raises all sorts of questions, never mind about technology, but about love and ethics and what is the nature of a human relationship. But in her version, in the Kirsten Dunst character's version, it's just pure sadness. the idea that she fell for this guy, it was not a good idea. She seems to have agreed, though I suspect under some coercion, because clearly it wasn't good for him either, right? You know, think how many CEOs would be grateful to think that if they happen to have an unfortunate relationship, they could make it part of the job contract that that person has the memory.
Many have.
A memory erased. When she realizes she's doing it again, in her case, what you get is just a kind of bleak recognition of the repetitiveness of human romantic misunderstanding and failure. And that to me is in a way, that's the real sadness at the heart of the film. It's her story.
It's interesting because it is a very powerful moment. And I think that there's something about that moment in the film that is, the word that came into my head was yearning. You know, the yearning for what she didn't know because it had been erased, but she did know about her feeling. You know, you can't necessarily take away what your subconscious desires, even, I mean, that's the point, isn't it? You can't erase the subconscious, you can only erase the memory. And so there she is, yearning for this thing, whilst, you know, shagging the other one, bouncing about, all being stoned. And then this guy comes in, and it just changes her, and she's trying to find him again. And the sadness is actually the finding and realizing she's been tricked out of it. I think it's that in that moment she realizes that she's been discarded. It's not about memory, it's about her having been discarded, and that is the heartbreak, isn't it?
And I think her suspicion that in the end it probably wasn't her choice to erase the memory.
Exactly.
It was his choice.
Exactly, yeah.
He's also, so Tom Wilkinson, he's not your typical tech CEO, but there's again one bit in it which feels like it just has a resonance now, which is the way in which she treats him, and he's willingly acquiesces in this. He's a guy who's selling a really sinister product, and he's doing it for money, and she presents him as a kind of savior. And she talks about him, the good that he's doing in the world. And it's on a very small scale, but the implication being that something's going on here which is going to be a kind of human salvation. Just think, this man, the good he's doing, he's a kind of saint. He's offering people erasure. He's offering people the opportunity to get past their blunders and their sadnesses. We see him and we see a sad guy in a white coat with some sinister tech selling a very dodgy product. And she sees, and she
so
sees
many
the Messiah.
names going through my head at the moment. You know,
she sees
Elon,
the Messiah.
Mark, Peter. You know, I mean, they're all going through my head. I mean, I do think there is something, isn't there, about technology, the promise, the change in the world, the change in the circumstances, the magic of it. You know, all of that is sort of a sleight of hand. And I was thinking the other day about, you know, how prescient so much art often starts in novels, then goes to the screen. And what we keep on seeing is sort of boys in silver suits, and the social relationships stay the same. I think what's interesting about this is it's actually being quite honest about wanting to change the social relationships. And in this case, romantic relationships, or erasure of pain in your romantic relationships that have not worked out. And I think that's what's a bit more interesting about this than a lot of the films that look at a future. And I think it's because it's on the cusp of looking backwards and forwards at the same time.
And in a way, the thing that's so seductive about this, I mean, we're used to the stuff that these tech companies selling us as just being fraudulent. But I think we can all relate to the ways in which this might, at some points, the thing that's being offered here, feel like it is a form of salvation. There is at least the promise here of freedom from certain kinds of pain. We can also see, because we're watching it from the outside, you know, we aren't Jim Carrey, we aren't crying our eyes out, we're watching someone crying his eyes out. We know that this is this is a kind of Faustian pact that he's making. But if you are crying your eyes out, if you are suffering that kind of pain, and someone comes and offers simply to take it away, and when she quotes Pope, the world forgetting the world forgot. It sounds gorgeous, doesn't it? And it's amazing, that scene, when that line comes up, when the eternal sunshine of the spotless mind comes up, we see elephants.
Yeah.
It's a gorgeous scene.
Great.
And it's, at least to me, the hint of the promise of something that is very dangerous and probably fraudulent, but the seduction is real.
It's really funny because in the end, I get to the end of the film and really, I think it's saying you just can't have love without knowing. You just can't have intimacy without pain. And there's something about that ending that is both a rerun and a promise of trouble to come that is very truthful. And I think that's actually the power of it. And recently, a couple that got together came to my house, and they were very new, and it was all very exciting. And I turned to make a cup of tea, and one of them started telling me the story, and the other one said, "I've heard that one before." And I thought, that's it, not going to work. You know, I mean, I've heard that one before is literally what a long-term relationship is. And I think that film, you know, that ending of the film really speaks to that. It speaks to the fact that, you know, you hear it once, it's love, it's joy, it's falling. You hear it, then it's familiar. Then you hear it's a bit boring, it's a bit boring. And then you start telling them to say that story to someone else. Tell the one about, you know. And I think that is actually a properly honest romance. It's not frilly, it's not the Valentine that it keeps on coming back to. It's actually saying, you gotta have the pain. The knowing is the intimacy. The knowing is the love. And it's a journey in which you have to learn to live with the pain. And so it's actually, you know, that's why I said at the beginning, I find it really romantic because it's the tough stuff. It's not the sweet stuff.
And in a way that comes out as he's trying to rescue the memories, as he feels they're going away and he's trying to rescue them. One of the things that we see is we see him remembering, you know, her speech where she kind of says, "I'm not going to save you. I'm not going to be that girl for this guy." And by the end, he's annoyed by this. But when he's trying to rescue the memories and he hears it again, it pulls him back. He doesn't want to lose the things that were annoying him. These are the things that he wants to hold on to. He wants to hold on to her saying the things that she said once too often, and that's what broke them up. When the memory is going, that's what he can't bear to lose.
Exactly, and that's why I don't think it's a very bleak ending. I think it is this really romantic ending that says they are meeting each other with realism. They're meeting each other willing to hear those stories for the rest of their life. And enjoy it while you can, was the other message somewhere in the middle of that. So it was like, take the risk for the long-term opportunity of this intimacy. And I think that was where it was going.
It's sometimes said that all human relationships, romantic relationships, start in manipulation. So you know, the phrase manipulation is used a lot, power imbalances. It's all power imbalances. It's all manipulation, because when you meet, you are presenting the version of yourself that you think might do the job, and it's clearly not you. And this film is also, I think it's good on that. And there are these lovely little details, like at the beginning, when they're meeting for the second time, but they think it's the first time. And you know, she's coming on to him and he's pretty wary. But he does that thing of kind of saying, "But I know you're a nice person. I know you're not the person you're coming across as." And she says, "How do you know that?" And they're already starting to play that game, which is, this is the first time we've met. We're clearly both putting on an act here. And at the same time, there's already a little extra intimacy, more than you would expect. There's a sort of hint that they each have a sense of the other that you wouldn't expect so early on. But it's really good at just conveying the extent to which all the way along, there isn't some pure moment where you discover the person, not at the beginning, not at the end, not at the middle. There isn't a point in the arc where they see the real person. Each of the stages is a kind of curation of self. And it's the arc that is the truth.
I think that's right. I think there's something about vulnerability as well, isn't there? That actually there is a performative thing of, okay, that's my best self. And we were talking earlier about the technology, and I'm trying to say, hang on a minute, it's curating you. You're a 9-year-old and you know your best angle is worrying. You know, there's a level of performity that is not good. But this is sort of saying, okay, my best self. But she's also daring him all the time to find her vulnerability and to catch her before she's out the door. And I think that in the flight fight, that's what I felt all the time. She was always in flight, and it was his job to sort of keep her, and that then becomes absolute during the moment, during the sequence when he's trying to hold her in his memory. So I think there is something about how we curate ourselves, but there's also something about what pressures are put on us to be certain things under certain circumstances. And the film does something about that, I think, in the relationship, because weirdly he's so frightened, but he's more confident than she is.
So when you say we now live in a world where a 9-year-old knows the best angle from which to take a photograph, so when you see a film like this and think about the world we're in now, do you feel like there is a real falling away in the quality, not just for children actually, but for all human beings trying to get to know other human beings? There's a real falling away in the quality, the ability that we have to do. It's all, even if you think it's all some form of curation, some form of manipulation, our ability to nonetheless, despite that, find the real connection. Does it feel like we're really at risk of losing something that this film captures, and now the technology is the barrier in the way of it? Because I have to be honest, it does to me. This feels like a long time ago. This feels like a vision of a world and a form of human relationship that is a little lost to us.
Yeah, I definitely, it's such a difficult question here because, yes, I see it in my work every day that people's intimacy, people's selfhood, and mainly their time is stolen. I would probably put it differently and say that people have to work a great deal harder to overcome the barriers to intimacy and to find the time for it and so on and so forth. And I do think that that's what I like about the film, is it's on the cusp. It's pointing at that, and it feels almost ahead of its time, even though it's so old-fashioned. But yes, absolutely. I know certainly from younger people who are younger than this audience, and definitely a lot younger than me, what they feel most acutely is that their time is stolen, and that when they look up from the attention from their phone normally, that what they see in each other and what they see in the mirror of themselves doesn't match the bright lights of what they're seeing here. So there's, I think that the competition is higher, the interiority is less, the time is less, and the opportunity is less. And then you go on then. That's a lot of things to get through. The love, when you get there, just the same. Complicated, difficult, rounds, and so on. But I think it is more difficult, yeah.
And I'm aware this is a bit of a cliche. People say it all the time about the world that we're in now, but again, it seems to come out quite strongly in relation to this story. So this is a story about memory, and it's a story about the memory of a relationship and the moments in the relationship that are the ones that capture the different stages of the relationship. But the one thing that these people are not doing when they are living in those moments is capturing them on their phones. You know, again, it feels like another world in the sense the film looks gorgeous, but the people in the film aren't thinking, how will this look when we take the picture of it, which will be our memory of this thing, even though we know in a way it'll be fake, but everything's fake. Yeah. But there isn't that extra layer of self-reflection, which is how are we going to memorialize this in the instant using this thing that we have in our pockets? And that, again, they're living it.
No, I mean, that's exactly what I was trying to get at in the beginning when I said it's not just your memory that's curated by the algorithm. Actually, how you present yourself is interrupted and curated by what moves, what gets likes, all of those things. And then you're left a little bit empty trying to work out what your actual memory is, because your memory is, in fact, the memory of taking the picture. Do you know what? You've just reminded me of something that I, quite a long time ago now, filmed in a data center, one of the biggest data centers in the world at the time. It was in Oregon, and it was, the blue blinking lights for rows and rows and rows and rows. And I've shown the clip of that film innumerable times all over the world. And when the lights go up, someone always says, "Oh my God, am I in there?" Yeah. And I go, "Yeah, you may well be in there." It was at the time this center of data. And they say a version of, but what if a bomb goes off and I'm no longer there? Always something of that, the idea of the destruction of the self being out there. And I go, don't worry, it'll be in another 11, 12, 50 different places. And you can watch people sort of dissipate at the idea that they are everywhere and not one place. And I think that sort of idea that you can't get rid of your memory anymore, but you also can't quite get hold of yourself, is what the problem is now. That it's so fragmented and so spread and so curated that it's actually very difficult to find that core inner being and then have a relationship with someone else who's also got the same problem. So you're adding in a lot of layers.
It's interesting. So the fear now is the erasure of memory because the data center would be wiped out. And there you would be going through the world without access to the thing that anchors your memory, rather than the version in this film, which is the erasure of the memories themselves, because you still have them, right? So the data center goes, you don't have the photographs of that holiday, but you still have the memory of that holiday. They haven't gone into your head and done what happens in this film and pinpoint the moments and strip them out. And yet the fear is there that it will be lost.
Yeah, and I think that if everybody in the cinema right now thought about all the photographs on their phones, and if suddenly those were no longer available, in the way that your VHSs, if you're old enough to have one, suddenly aren't playable. Think about that. And that is a lot of precious memory, and people will be very upset about it. And so we've outsourced a lot of things. And if, as you have just said, that you're taking the picture instead of feeling the moment, that is an additional cost. And I have definitely, I'm sure everybody's had this experience, but been in a place of exceptional beauty that I'm never going to revisit in my life, and watch people literally come through photographing ahead of me, and they have not seen a thing. And so I think that there is also the creation of memory, and maybe that's what I didn't say earlier. It's how do we create memory? How are we in the place to have the memory even before we start worrying about erasing it?
So one of the other things about this film that strikes me as really interesting and true is when Joel, Jim Carrey's character, is trying to hold on to himself. And there's this sort of chase going on. They're trying to find him and pull the memories out, and he's trying to take Clementine with him to a place they can't get to. So you're going deeper and deeper into the self. He decides, she decides, they decide together that the place you have to go to is humiliation. Yeah. And in the end, the bit that's really you, the bit that they can't get to, but the bit that really, in a way, anchors you, particularly childhood humiliation, that's in your personal memory data set, almost the foundational point. I have a feeling that that might be true. Or is that saying something about myself? But, you often hear people saying, I wake up at 3 a.m, and the thing that makes me wake up bolt upright is the memory of some trivial humiliation from many, many years ago that somehow is just lodged. And I just think it's really interesting that when he's looking for his true self, the self they can't get, he doesn't go for the love and the beauty and the hope. He goes for the humiliation. And that's the bit where he's not safe, but he is himself.
I mean, it's a really interesting question. I think violence, sex, one's first experiences of those absolutely huge feelings that sort of are embodied. It's not just the bullying, it's the bloodying. And then obviously, the mother coming in on him and all of that. I just wonder whether that isn't the essence of human, realizing one's power, the possibility of violence and the possibility of being overwhelmed by any feeling. I wonder whether it's that rather than humiliation, but I don't know.
And in a way, again, one of the ways in which our world is different is that so much humiliation has been franchised out. It's moved online. In a way, many of our most humiliating experiences are themselves now mediated by the technology. And again, this is a film in which those humiliations, those moments of violence, and as you say, it's both power and also vulnerability. There's a purity to them because they are absolutely experienced in the moment, which is why it's what anchors him. And in a way, it's almost likely now that's another thing that would be in the data center. I mean, I don't know what the equivalent of the mother coming in and finding him masturbating, but it's, you feel like these are the things that are also in the hands of the technology companies. I mean, we can all think of examples of people whose lives have been ruined, not because they've had that intimate, private version of that shame, but the public version of that shame.
Oh, I mean, I can give you chapter and verse on the humiliations online, but maybe the most, I don't know why it's come into my head, but there was recently in South Korea the most extraordinary situation where a bunch of men, and the reason I'm saying it is there were sexual elements to it, but it was literally humiliation of women remotely, online, in their thousands, making them licking the floors of toilets and things like that. Absolutely like the bird scene, but it involved thousands. And I think that that's, again, something else, which is the fact that it's not individual. And we've all had something that is like going on an air pocket and you just go, oh, no. And any time you remember it, it sort of does take you back. So I think that's what the film is talking about. But I think, that, again, a lot of survivors and victims, what they talk about is the fact that anybody who smiles at them in the street may be someone who has seen their humiliation. And so that they cannot dare to be in public because they don't know who did the seeing. And that is something that I work with a lot.
There is a race going on among certain tech companies to create brain-computer interfaces. And Elon Musk, with his Neuralink chip, has been quite explicit about the fact that he wants to develop something that can both send and receive information from the internet, that you could have a brain that's connected to the internet, giving information to a computer and receiving information. And I wonder whether or not you think there's a time when tech companies will want to actually actively erase things from our brains, and whether or not we will be happy to let them do so.
On the want, I think yes. You've already mentioned one name, who has that desire. I think there are other people who have that desire. And whether it is control or erasure or putting something in, I can't say. But do they want to have control? Absolutely. Whether we'll be willing, I would love to sit here and just say, no, you gotta be kidding. But I am absolutely astounded by what we have been willing to allow in plain sight. And I think that a lot of my analysis of what's happened with tech is actually not about tech at all. It's about the concentration of power. It's about money. It's about control and the way that not only money has been extracted and data has been extracted, but so too culture, behavior, sexual appetite, childhood, you name it. So I am an optimist and I'm a fighter and I'm in the middle of the fight, so I'm not prepared to give in right now. So don't be willing is my advice to the room. Don't be willing. But yes, definitely it's a battleground.
My question was about the saddest, as you described, the saddest scene in the film. And I wondered, so when we find out Kirsten Dunst's memory has been erased, I think we also find out that the leader of this company's memory hasn't in that situation. And that to me felt familiar in that he can't escape his blunders. He's built this technology and he doesn't use it. We hear about Silicon Valley elites insulating their children from the world they've created, but this felt like scientifically naive, whereas the world we live in is much more commercially cynical, or however you might describe it. I just wondered what you made of that.
I think that is a fantastic observation. No, absolutely true. And it is remarkable how many schools in and around Silicon Valley have no tech whatsoever. And it is remarkable how often that comes up. I don't have much to add. I think you've made a great observation. I think the only thing that I always think, and I've seen the film 3 times now, is the sort of desperateness of his wife, because it wasn't erased from her either. And, you know, she was looking on. So that's one of the reasons that I find that scene very heartbreaking, because both of the women, the one who can't forget and the one who's been forced to forget, are undone. And the guy is, as you've just observed, maybe a little bit sorry, but unchanged.
And it also feels like it is the fantastical version of something that is super familiar, which is those relationships happen all the time. And as I said earlier, I'm sure the CEOs, if they could, would like to erase the memory of the underling with whom they've had a relationship. But in the absence of that, it's always the underling who moves on, and it's never the CEO who moves on. And in the same way in this film, he doesn't have his memory erased. He has her memory erased. And it's the equivalent. He in a sense, removes her from the situation, and he just carries on.
I think we've seen a few CEOs move on recently.
But not voluntarily.
No, not voluntarily.
Given the choice, that's the preferred scenario. And in that way, it rings very true, not in a good way.
I wondered if either of you thought there was anything significant about infidelity in the film, because to me, it almost seemed like an interesting twist when he seemed quite obsessed, Jim Carrey's character seemed quite obsessed with her infidelity. And then it turns out that when they first met, he was still with his previous partner. And then obviously we also have the other sort of cheating subplot. Do you think that's just, to your earlier point about kind of relationships being necessarily messy, or do you think there's something else interesting going on there?
Okay. I did think it was about messy. It was setting up the conditions under which, you know, this set of characters might like to clean up their act. That it was more narrative than purposeful. But I don't know what was in the mind of the writer. I think that that's part of the unsettling thing, isn't it, in the film, that you're never quite sure what's real and who's correct at any given moment. And obviously infidelity, when talking about relationships, really fuels that sort of narrative problem.
And it felt to me that scene towards the end where you see what happened to them in the house, where they went to the beach house. And they know nothing about each other. They know nothing. And he finds himself, she says, "Are you married?" And he says, "No." And then he says, "But I am living with someone." And then she says, "Man or woman?"
Yeah,
and he says, "Woman, of course." And she says, "Well, at least I'm on the right track." And they're feeling each other out. Again, I can't think of another word than analog, in a very analog way. They have zero information. And in that context, it is all a kind of manipulation. That is, everyone is just trying to give the answer that they think will get them to the next step. And yeah, it does feel like that is part of what it's saying about the fact that all relationships probably begin and end, maybe not in infidelity, but in that kind of complicated dance in which tiny scraps of information are being responded to with other tiny scraps of information until something finally coheres. And other people are caught in the crossfire. They always are.
Yeah, and also there is, there's an enormous amount of projection and desire and almost fueling your own desire by thinking about the desirability of the other person and so on, because he's also very obsessed about whether she is or isn't shagging anyone. So, I think it is thematically very helpful to the film.
I was really struck by the difference in the two men, in the sense that Tom Wilkinson has chosen to be forgotten and Jim Carrey hasn't chosen to be forgotten, and he's devastated to not have had that choice. And I was just thinking about that in context of, there's a lot of talk at the moment about the right to be forgotten online, and I just wondered if you had anything to say about that.
I think that the right to be forgotten is much more about what others are claiming from you, and sometimes in relation to kids, we want them to be able to erase their blunders. So in that sense, it's a sort of an active thing, but a lot of the right to be forgotten is actually about what people have done to you, taken from you, the mistake, having some control over your digital self. I'm struggling a bit here. I tell you why I'm struggling is I don't think it's possible to be forgotten anymore. And so I think the right to be forgotten is sort of its last decade issue. I think that the question that we have to now face is whether we can get any authority over our digital selves and any proper, meaningful control. I think forgotten is probably gone.
So it also brings to mind for me another interesting film, Notting Hill. And the scene in Notting Hill when Rhys Ifans opens the door and they all take a photograph of him in his underwear, and then Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant have this row in which she says, this is the thing that's always going to now be associated with me. And he says, it's just fish and chip paper. And she says, no, you don't understand how newspaper cuttings work. So still it's kind of a pre-digital version of this. But once this thing gets attached, it will always be there. But that feels quaint now too, for the reasons you said. It's sort of on the cusp. So the implication being, Hugh Grant can still say it's just newspapers. In the end, the world moves on.
Yeah.
And we now live in a world where, like you say, the right to be forgotten feels like a utopian thing because really it never moves on. And I think people do feel now that you're one step away from making the mistake that will always be attached to you. And there is no possibility that it won't be the first thing that comes up on the Google search, and that you're in the hands of these algorithms anyway that will sort for it to be the first thing that comes up, partly because they do feed on scandal and humiliation. But that fear that's always been there, that you'll do the thing that will be the first line of your obituary. This predates even the last, 100 years ago, you would have characters in works of fiction thinking that this is the thing that will be on my gravestone. But now the version of it, which is that every day and in every way, people are one step away from the thing that will attach, and you'll never detach it from your name, your memory, your identity.
I think that is true, and it's one of the things that actually, again, kids say a lot, that they feel silenced because nothing disappears. So they don't dare speak, and they also feel judged because everything is so visible. So if you're judged and you're silent, then it's very difficult to be risky. And then if you are risky, then the front page is forever. But I think I'm sitting here struggling in my mind between this moment that we're in of, you could call it an excess of memory rather than the erasure that we've been discussing. And at the same time, my assertion that it's not really the you. And so this film is actually really quite intimate about them and the erasure, as in, the right to be forgotten or so on, is something different, because there's actually such an excess of you out there.
And I realise even as I was saying what I was just saying, what's the first line of the obituary? The Julia Roberts character in Notting Hill. This was thought to be a kind of luxury problem. Most people don't get an obituary. Her argument with Hugh Grant is she's a celebrity and he's not. He doesn't care. She cares. We now live in a world where it could be any of us, right? In that sense, there is no distinction. You could wake up tomorrow and the thing that you've done, and we know these stories, right? You've made a joke on Twitter, you fly across the world, you arrive in South Africa in the famous case, and you discover that you are world famous and your life is over. And that is the thing that is a million miles away, even from the world of 2004.
Maybe this is what they meant when they said they were democratizing the information ecosystem.
Any of our lives could be ruined in an instant. That was the last film in this series of Films of Ideas, but we will be coming back with more from the Regent Street Cinema later in 2026. For our first episode of 2026, next time, I'm going to be talking about a subject that comes out of this series, and specifically out of my conversation with the playwright Lee Hall, in which we discussed the film My Dinner with Andre. In that episode, Lee Hall mentioned Wallace Shawn's play, also film, The Designated Mourner, which is one of the most extraordinary political fictions of our time. And in our next episode, I'm going to be exploring exactly what makes it so remarkable. And then lots more to come, including episodes with Robert Saunders about Irish Home Rule, more politics on trial, and a new series, What's Wrong with Political Philosophy. Do join us for all of that. Happy New Year. This has been Past, Present, Future.